Ladies and gentlemen, hola. Welcome to TechEd 2013. Had a little bit of a scare up here. For some reason, my laptop wouldn't connect to the internet. But the beauty of having everything up in the cloud, I just switched to the main demo machine, and I think I'm good to go. Or let's keep our fingers crossed, shall we? My name is Girish Chander. I'm a lead program manager on the Windows Azure Active Directory team. And over the next 75 minutes, I hope to unravel the mysteries of Windows Azure Active Directory. Now, when we were here last time at this forum, it was just about the time we had started talking about Azure Active Directory in its current form. And we were just about to release a public preview of AAD, as we call it in short form. But since then, we've actually released general availability of AAD. We have added a lot more features, and over the next 75 minutes, I hope to cover some of those features. And so I've reworked this deck to include some of the talking points around those features, but I've retained some of the framing of the overview, given that this is an overview session. And so let's have some fun listening and talking about Azure Active Directory. But before we get into the meat of it, I want to get into the audience participation section of the show. This is a round I'd like to call the raise your hand if. So, but before I do that, just want to let you know, I'm a big superhero fan. How many superhero fans up in the crowd? Great. And I want each and every one of you to know that I think of each and every one of you as superheroes. Now, what does this little tidbit of information have anything to do with Azure Directory? Nothing whatsoever. But it helps me frame my next set of questions. So, raise your hands if your day job involves being a IT pro superhero. All right. Okay. Good. Raise your hands if you're in the developer role and you're a developer superhero as your day job. All right. And raise your hands if part of being a developer superhero involves creating apps for other organizations to use, not just for your own organization. Great. And I'm sure once you're done with the day jobs, you're all crime-fighting vigilantes, aren't you, after work? Okay. Sympathy laughs here and there. Great. Thank you. But the reason I got into this is Azure Active Directory actually does have a lot of appeal for all these three superhero personas that I talked about, right? As an administrator, as an IT pro, you want to, this is important because you want to understand how Azure Active Directory relates to Active Directory on the on-premises side, Windows Server Active Directory. How it's different, how you can best leverage the capabilities of Azure Active Directory to suit your needs as an IT pro. On the developer side, you want to know how easy is it to connect to identities in the cloud. How can we solve some of the identity management problems that you face when building cloud applications? The way to think about Windows Azure Active Directory is think of it as a platform service, just like you would think of compute and storage as platform services. This is identity as a service, right? So let's get into it. But in order to do justice to understanding Azure Active Directory, let's first frame the problem. Now, if you go back a few years, a lot of organizations face this problem, and some, and in fact, I would say many still do, where even their apps deployed within their organization, they had a number of these apps that needed individual provisioning of various credentials for users. This was a nightmare for IT admins because they now had to figure out what it meant to provision a new user in their organization and provision them credentials across these various apps. And for IWs, it was really bad because, hell, they needed to remember multiple credentials. But then a notion of a directory came along, Active Directory being the most popular, of course, and helped solve this problem, helped consolidate the identity equation. So IWs were ecstatic because, hey, I now got a single sign-on capability within my organization for all the apps. IT admins were really happy because it solved their IT management problem to a great degree. Ironically, however, as apps, well, I'm having trouble with my clicker. As apps have moved into the cloud, we're seeing a refragmentation of the identity space. All the work that has been done to consolidate the directory, consolidate identities, is actually being put to the test again with these cloud apps, right? And so yet again, organizations are having to deal with multiple apps, each of which require provisioning separate identities into them. How many of you use cloud applications today? How many of you have had the problem where you either upload a CSV file on a daily basis or a regular basis, or some other mechanism to upload identities? Right? A few of you. So you know what I'm talking about, right? So cloud apps are getting fragmented, are fragmenting the directory space in a large way. Microsoft faced this problem too. As we were building Office 365, we had this problem. Office 365 is a suite of services: SharePoint Online, Exchange Online, Lync Online. Each of these services, in order to offer the best-of-breed experience to their customers, needed access to the customer's directories. Right? How do you have a service plumb in to the customer directories residing on premises? Plus, we wanted to operate this at cloud scale. You're not going to get performant trying to do that. Right? So we introduced Azure Active Directory. This was actually built in conjunction with Office 365. Office 365 services leverage Azure Active Directory. How many of you have Office 365 or use Office 365? How many of you, before this talk or before leafing through the material for this talk, knew that Office 365 meant you had a Windows Azure Active Directory? Good. I'm actually very heartened to see that, because over the past year, the number one source of confusion for a lot of our customers has been, hey, I have an Office 365 account. How do I connect it to my Windows Azure Active Directory? It is one and the same. Azure Active Directory was actually built in conjunction with Office, and Office services leverage it. Now, we also have mechanisms. If you have AD on premises, we also have an ability to project your Active Directory up into the cloud, right? And we'll talk a little more about that in a few minutes. But if you don't have an Active Directory, and many organizations do, they don't have any footprint on premises for their directory, these organizations can create an Azure Active Directory and leverage these services, right? So let me actually just show that to you. Let me go. So this is where you typically go if you were using the portal to go and manage Office 365, right? So I'm logging into my my company here. And, just to show you that it's all part of the same, here's the list of users that I have. Batman, Iron Man, Superman, right? And then Girish and Jono. Let's go to the Azure Management Portal. This is how many of you use the Azure AAD portal? For a number of you. Good. Now you go here and you see it's actually the same directory. When this comes up, the internet seems a little slow here. Get up there. And you see the same set of users. Now, I could have gone, created a user, proven that it's one and the same, but a lot of you don't have that source of confusion that Office and Azure are one and the Office and Azure Active Directory reside on the same directory. So I'm going to skip that and get back to the presentation. But while we solved it for Office 365, it was by no means our intent to restrict it for the use of Office 365. If you look at other Microsoft applications, CRM, Dynamics, ERP, Intune, they also leverage Azure Active Directory. But we wanted to go further, and we have gone further, which is your LOB apps, your line of business applications, your in-house applications that you build can take the same advantage of Azure Active Directory. Furthermore, if you're building ISV apps, apps that you want to sell to other organizations, you can take advantage of Azure Active Directory. Right? It allows you to get the single sign-on capabilities, the identity management capabilities, by plugging into Azure Active Directory, the same way Office does. Because from a cloud application point of view, you have the same set of problems Office did. How does a user authenticate to a cloud application? How does the cloud application connect up to the directory to retrieve information about the users, the organization, their relationships, in order to provide the best-of-breed experiences? Right? In working with Azure Active Directory, in thinking about what it means to service and surface the needs for cloud applications, we talked to a number of organizations that were building apps. And we saw a pattern here. On the server side, there were a number of web applications. On the client, and a number of web service APIs for some of the rich clients and other services to use. And they're both sides plugged into a profile store. And sometimes the profile store also had an account store associated with it. But the server-side applications were written across a wide variety of languages and stacks. On the client side, you had browsers connecting up to these apps. You had rich clients, mobile apps, desktop apps, and you had other service applications that could connect to these APIs. The one thing that was common across all of these organizations, they wanted to support a great diverse set of languages, devices, and stacks. Right? When AD was built back in the day, we had a much restricted problem. You had a closed perimeter. You had applications within that perimeter running on desktops, running on services. And you could actually design around that notion. And you had a closed system. You could say, hey, here's LDAP, here's Kerberos, go plug in and write your apps. Now, that does not work on internet scale. That does not work with the diversity of apps, platforms, and languages we see. So this brought about the cloud design point for Azure Active Directory. The design point fundamentally is that we must embrace the diversity. We must maximize device and platform reach, which means we needed to hone in on an HTTP and REST-based stack to access the directory. And we also looked at OAuth as a mechanism, again, another standard that we've seen develop. OAuth as a mechanism to access the directory for authentication. Another design point that we wanted to use was multi-tenancy. This is your organizations up in the cloud. We took great pains in ensuring that the isolation and security boundaries across organizations in the cloud were maintained. And the third one, we had to optimize for availability. You're running critical applications tied to Azure Active Directory. This had to be highly available, accessible all the time. We needed consistency of performance. Whether you had 10 users, 1,000 users, or 1,000,000 users, you expect a certain set of capabilities and performance out of Azure Active Directory. We designed that into the principles here. And then, of course, it had to operate at an internet scale. Now, later on in the deck, I'll give you some numbers to show you the things we've already achieved with Azure Active Directory to prove some of these design points. Now, in conversations with these customers, this picture has proven very helpful. It's something we like to actually talk about. On the on-premises side, this is the lower half of this picture here. On the left-hand side, you had things like PowerShell. You had consoles that you'd use to manage the directory. On the right-hand side, for applications, they typically authenticate using Kerberos. They'd access the directory using LDAP. Right? On the top side, if you want to draw a parallel to Azure Active Directory, we have a number of portals. As you just saw two. We had the Office portal. We had Windows Azure, the Windows Azure portal. You can use portals to access it. We also have a PowerShell solution to access Azure Active Directory. These can be used to manage the directory. On the right, for applications, we're saying in embracing the diversity of these apps, we're standardizing on REST as a mechanism to access the directory and OAuth to authenticate. So let's talk about the programmatic access to the directory. We like to call this the directory graph API. So this is a RESTful API to create, read, update, delete users, devices, groups, objects in the directory. But more importantly, it allows you to access relationships. Who's the manager of a particular individual? What groups is this individual a member of? Who are the members of a given group? This allows you to access relationships, and that's why we call this a graph. Because most apps out there, in order to provide those experiences, in order to light up the best-of-breed experiences, they want these relationships. That's why we call this the graph. The requests use standard HTTP methods, post, get, patch, delete. Our response, which I'll show you in a second, is either in XML or JavaScript object notation, which is really, just think about it as a notation for sending back name-value pairs. And we use standard HTTP codes. We're also compatible with OData v3. OData, as a standard, allows us to actually craft the more complex queries around filtering, around searching for specific attributes in the directory. And as I said, for authentication, we use OAuth 2. Here's an example of a graph API call. Right? It's actually a very simple, it's a simple request. The first part of it, the directory.windows.net, is essentially our endpoint for the graph. Contoso.com, on top of the picture, that refers to the specific tenant, the directory, your organization, that you want to craft the call to. Users is basically constraining what you're looking for, the object type you're looking for. And then, in this case, we're looking for a particular user called ed at contoso.com. And I've actually formatted some of the output here. The entire output didn't fit in the screen, and I'll show you the actual output in a second. But as you can see, the manager and the member of, these are actual links. You can actually click on these links. You can actually browse and look up the specific users being referred to here. Right? Here are the full set of protocols that we support in Azure Active Directory. I talked about the REST-based access and the purpose for it. OAuth, two flavors you can use OAuth for, and there are deeper sessions that cover this over the next couple of days. There's a service-to-service authentication. This is when your app accesses the directory in primarily the app's context. There's also a delegated access, where your app can access the directory in the context of the user connecting to the app. Right? And the return format is a JOT token format. We also support SAML, SAML 2.0, and Federation. We use this with Office 365 today. How many of you are using Federation with Office 365? Great. So let me show you I showed you a concatenated version of the graph call. Let me actually show you a bigger version of it. So this is an app that we actually have put up there. This allows you to browse any given directory. Right? Call it the Graph Explorer. Now, if you don't have a directory, you just want to play with it, we have the capability in the upper right corner to say, hey, just use my demo company. And so we have a company that's created up there called Graph Directory 1. And now here I'm going to say, hey, OK, in this, show me, actually, I can just go and say, do this. Right? This tells me the top-level nodes that I can browse within my tenancy. Users, groups, applications, devices. But let's say I just want to return users. Right? Now, in gory detail, it returns to me all the users, all the attributes of all the users in the system. Right? So, for example, you can browse down here, and you see this user is city, country, and department have not been populated, so let's pick one up. Actually, you know what? Easier. Let me go up here and I say, give me a user called Adam at graph directory 1.on.microsoft.com. Right, so this returns one specific user. And now we can look at the properties of this user. Right? Let's skip the assigned plans and the assigned licenses. This has to do with the actual licenses that we grant a particular user. The way Office 365, for example, works is we give a specific user a license to Office. And so the assigned plan captures that. But if you skip over that, you say this Adam belongs to Seattle, he's in the US, he belongs to the department US Sales. If you wanted to know just specifically which city he is in, for example, you could say, graph city. And you get back the value Seattle. Now, most of the time when you're actually leveraging the graph in your application, you're actually wrapping it up into a high-level abstraction of code. And Ed Vu has a session on Friday that goes into this in more gory detail. And we've released a few helper modules that allow you and enable you to actually wrap this up in your applications much easier. Right? But I just wanted to give you a sense of the Graph Explorer itself. All right, let's go back. But this is all great and fine. This says, great, there's Azure Active Directory, Office uses it, your apps can use it. You can query it using the graph. You can authenticate using OAuth. That's fantastic. But how does an organization actually craft their own application? And how can an organization use that LOB application and have users access it? The paradigm is simple. You have an end user, but before he can use a cloud application, you need an authorized user to come in and say, this app is blessed for my tenant's usage. If you think about it, you do this with Office 365 today. When you signed up with a tenancy, the act of actually purchasing that app underneath the covers blessed the app for usage for your tenant. Right? But the way you conceptualize this for generic third-party apps that may or not be issued by Microsoft, right, is an authorized user, and I notice I didn't say admin. This could be someone an admin nominated. It could be a user who's got a certain set of permissions. Could come in and say, hey, I want to authorize this app to be used in my tenant. And that creates underneath the covers what we call a service principal. You all know of user principal that stands for user accounts, for users. Service principal is essentially a principal that stands for the application. Now, in addition to that, the authorized user can say, hey, and by the way, I want this application to be able to read data from my directory. Right? If you had to do that, you need to actually bestow upon this application service principal some permissions. And the way you do that in Active Directory is by assigning that service principal to a role. Now, this is completely optional. Not all applications will access the directory. Some applications will just integrate it from a single sign-on point of view. Right? But if the application says, hey, I need to access the directory, the administrator or the authorized individual has to say, yes, I consent to this. I agree that this app can now access the directory for reads, but not writes, or for both reads and writes. Right? I keep forgetting I had to turn back and click towards this. So now the end user, in order to authenticate to the, you know what, I'm just going to give up. We're going to do this. In order to authenticate to the app, goes and hits a user authentication endpoint. Right? This is similar to what you saw me do a few minutes ago, where I tried to access the portal. It redirected me to an authentication endpoint where I could type in my user credentials. I get back a user token that I then present to the application, the cloud application. Now, the cloud application could do one of two things here. The cloud application could say, OK, great. I know who you are. I'm going to look up my profile, and I can flourish your information with my custom profile information for you as a user. Right? And then provide experiences of the like. But it could also do more. It could say, I see you have some information in the token, tells me your username, but maybe I want to understand who your manager is, right? For that purpose, it could actually call into a delegated authentication endpoint where it says, I would like to access the graph on behalf of this user. That returns a token that it can then use to access the directory. And that access control is a combination of the app and the user's permissions. So this is a delegated authentication. The app is accessing the directory on behalf of the user for a specific set of reads that it has previously been provisioned and permissioned to by the authorized user. This is how generically cloud applications written and made available can be used by organizations and made available to their end users to use. So let me show you an example of this. This is a very simple app. In fact, we're in the process of trying to make it a little better as well. So it's a simple app that you connect to, and it retrieves a set of users, right? So I go to this app. It's called the expense application. And this is the first time I'm hitting this app. And so I want to sign up. Right? So I click sign up. Actually, hold on. I don't know if I click. Oops. Let's try that again. All right. So notice what happened here. On a parallel window, I'm actually authenticated still to the portal as girish@gcteched1.onmicrosoft.com. So I click sign up, and it's already authenticated me. You can see on top, you can see Windows Azure. You can see on the top right, it says Girish, right? But I'm authenticated, but the app has no presence in this tenant, right? So I, as the admin, Girish is the admin, now have to grant access to this application for my tenant. Now, there are a few things to notice. The app has declared that it needs the ability to single sign-on using identities in this tenancy. And it needs to be able to read the directory data. That's what you see on the left. The admin, me in this case, by virtue of granting access, I'm provisioning this service principal. I'm creating a service principal for this application in my tenancy, and I'm granting the service principal read permissions to my directory. Right? Let's go ahead and do that. It's going to take a few seconds. Right. Oh, let me try that again. Let's go here. Let's remove all that. Demo gods will be favorable here. Did I get that right? I did. Okay. Okay. So we're back there again. Grant access, and this should work. What was happening was I had multiple sessions with various credentials and was interfering with this. So now, I've actually authenticated to the app. It says, hello, Girish, and it's allowed me access. And a few things have happened in the background. I, as the admin, granted the app access, and the act of granting the app access has also, because of the way the app has been plumbed, says once you've granted access, the service principal is provisioned, and now I can redirect you to an application endpoint of the app's choosing. So the app has told me, OK, once the users have consented, Azure, send them back to this URL. And so now I'm at this URL. Now, this is my old tenant. And if you remember the superhero users I had there, if I click users, this app is using the graph to access these queries. Right? It needed the read permissions that were bestowed upon it by virtue of that consent dialog, where we granted access to retrieve the list of users. Right? So this is just one simple example of an app that you can build. In fact, it's pretty easy to whip this up. This will take you all of, I'm going to say, 45 minutes at max. I mean, the toughest part of this would actually be crafting the UX. Right? It's really, really simple. And the gory details of this, I should stop calling it gory details. The lovely details of this we'll get into in deeper sessions that I have gentlemen in the front row here. Dushyant is going to talk about what it means to authenticate applications to Azure Active Directory. And Ed is going to talk about what it means to actually access the directory using the Graph API. And both these sessions are on, is it Thursday morning, guys? Thursday morning? Friday morning. Friday morning. All right. So we've talked a lot about there's Azure Active Directory, how you can build applications, how you, as a developer of applications, can leverage Azure Active Directory the same way Office does, how you as IT admins can now control better which applications get to use your Azure Active Directory. This is your directory. You get to control that. You can now also control which users can access these apps. But all that set aside, there's also this huge set of investments you've made on premises with Active Directory. So how does Azure Active Directory relate to Windows Server Active Directory? How can you best integrate both these directories? In fact, we'd like to refer to this as one directory, Active Directory. You have the Server Active Directory and the Azure Active Directory. And you will see in our continuum of investments, we're going to try and blend the two together more and more. The reason I went into illustrating the difference between the two was because the cloud-based Azure Active Directory had fundamentally different design points. Having said that, we do want to leverage your investments on on Server Active Directory. So we have a tool. It's very appliance-like. It's called the DirSync tool, directory synchronization. How many of you have used the DirSync tool? Right. Fair number of you. Good. So the DirSync tool allows you to retain your management of entities on premises, on your directory on premises, but then synchronizes information periodically up into the cloud. Right. This way, you don't have two places to manage the same set of objects. You can just do it on premises, and the DirSync tool takes care of the rest. We also have something called federation. Federation allows you to say, hey, management is one thing, but I actually would like my end users to get single sign-on using their credentials, their Windows credentials on premises, two resources up in the cloud. Right? So we like drawing this picture where we have AD projecting up into the cloud to Azure AD. And you can actually leverage those investments from a management and single sign-on perspective using DirSync and federation. And doing so allows the picture that I drew earlier to be changed a little bit. Not only can you get the single sign-on effect to all your cloud-based apps, by the magic of federation, because the users are using their Windows identity, which is getting federated up into the cloud, you can actually get single sign-on to apps that are tied even on-premises. So it's one identity to use your on-premises applications, and then by virtue of federation, your cloud applications. Right? So I talked a little bit about the DirSync tool already. It's very easy to set up. It's like 7 clicks, 10 clicks, still close enough. 10 clicks, and the person I was looking to is Jonah Look, who's actually the PM for directory synchronization, and he's got a session on Thursday, which will get into the deeper details of this. And I talked about how DirSync syncs objects up into the cloud, but one of the things we just recently released was password sync. We've heard from a lot of customers that they don't want to invest too much on premises in terms of single sign-on. They're on this huge path to move everything online. One of the things that has been greatly asked for is password sync, where we synchronize passwords up into the cloud. But don't worry, we've actually done this in a very secure manner. We don't synchronize your clear text passwords. It's actually a hash of the passwords that we send up over the wire, right? So this doesn't give you single sign-on. It's what we'd like to term, and Jono, I think, coined this, simple sign-on. You still have two sets of credentials. It just happens to be the same. And DirSync does the heavy lifting of saying, hey, did you change your password on-prem? Don't worry. I'll synchronize it up into the cloud, and it looks and feels like it's one credential. So it looks like it's single sign-on. It's really simple sign-on. Make sense? And then federation, I talked a little bit about this too. Federation is true single sign-on. It's the single identity that you're authenticating to on-premises that you're now using to access the cloud. But one of the advantages it offers you, it allows you to actually do things like client-based filtering, access control based on which IP address the connection is coming from. For example, you can do things like, if you're authenticating from outside my network, you can actually have a certain set of rules tied with your ADFS rule set. Or you can tie your strong authentication mechanisms that you've invested in on-premises, either smart card, OTP, whatever, and use that to essentially deliver the higher security authentication for access even up to the cloud services. These are the benefits you get out of true single sign-on. Which brings us to, I talked about how you can get stronger authentication using the traditional mechanisms you've invested in on-premises. But you can actually get stronger authentication up in the cloud now, even without any investments with ADFS on-premises. So most customers, when they think about having data up in the cloud, when they think about integrating with cloud-based applications, they want to add another layer of security over it. Usernames and passwords are traditionally not the most secure authentication factor. You want to add a high level of security guarantee. You want to add an additional factor to it. We acquired a company recently called PhoneFactor. It was already in the market for some time. And PhoneFactor allows you to access or provide that second factor authentication using a device that everyone has now, the phone, right? And they actually, it's a trusted platform by a number of customers. And they actually offer solutions where the phone can come into play as your second factor in a number of different ways. And you can configure this. So on the one hand, you can actually have a mobile application, right? And with the mobile application, you can do a one-time push of a second factor passcode to the application that the user at the time of authentication can use. Alternatively, you can actually download the app and configure it for an OTP. So now the app independently, synchronized with the server, is generating a one-time password that you can then use to authenticate as a second factor. You can also make out-of-band calls. You can configure it saying that this user is for 2FA, and the user can say, hey, actually, for my 2FA, just send me a call, and let me authenticate that through that. Or you can have a text message being sent, right? You can send a one-time passcode through SMS, or you can do an out-of-band text message. And the architecture is simple. You authenticate using your username and password. You get in that way as the first factor. And then based on whether you are required to use 2FA or not, you then are prompted for that second factor. Now, the admin selects which users are required to do 2FA, right? And when you're nominated for 2FA, you go through the second factor authentication. And once you authenticate, all the cloud applications that you've authenticated to you can actually get single sign-on across them. Now, in the future, we'll also allow you capabilities to say that you only want to leverage 2FA when accessing one particular application or when these sets of applications. That's part of the continuum that we're getting to. We don't have that just yet. Right? Let me show you this in action. So let me switch here. Right. So here's my phone factor app that I've installed on my Windows phone. This, because I didn't want to rely on connectivity here, I'd chosen an option for this demo to do the one-time password thing, which is, so this on the client side is an app that's just generating OTP passwords every few seconds, right? Synchronized on the server with something else, or on the server side with a server-side app. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back, and I'm going to try and authenticate. Just do that. So let me go to the Office portal. Let me authenticate. Now, I previously configured Batman to require 2FA, right? So let me go and say Batman at So it says for added security, we need to verify your account, right? And in a few seconds, it's going to show me another dialog that allows me to enter the OTP passcode, right? So right now, my app has a passcode of 314315. Authenticate. And in a few seconds, it'll sign me in. This gives me my second factor authentication, right? How many of you, we released this fairly recently in preview, and we made this, a few months ago, we had this available for admins only, and now we made it available for end users to use as well. How many of you have seen or played with this using 2FA? So now I have access and using 2FA authentication. All right. So I talked a lot about using of the plethora of platforms and apps and the various stacks they use and having them be able to integrate with Azure Active Directory. But you can't really finish a talk on Azure Active Directory without talking about the devices. Now, previously, in the world of AD on-premises, we were content saying, hey, there was these servers, there were PCs, LDAP, Kerberos, domain join, trusted devices, and we would actually set up single sign-on, and we'd enable management of these devices through that framework. But now users are demanding more. Your employees are demanding more. They want to be able to bring in their Surfaces, their iPads, their Android devices. And they want to be able to get, for productivity reasons, they want to be able to get access to all these resources from those devices. So there's a session that goes into this in more detail that Samuel is going to present on. Sam, is that tomorrow? Is that Thursday? Thursday morning, where we talk about devices in a lot more detail. But what we've done with Azure Active Directory is devices are now a first-class object that you can manage on-premises, you can synchronize up into the cloud, you can register up in the cloud. And the continuum here is your devices can actually, even if they're not Windows devices, your iPhones, your Androids, they can actually be joined to the workplace, something we're terming workplace join. And this puts a level of trust around them. And now they can be used as your second factor authentication. They can be used for granting single sign-on. Right? So you don't need a specific phone. This could be any device you're already using. And that can prove that additional level of security as a trusted device for your network. And administrators can now manage these devices. Right? And we'll talk about, Sam's session will go into more detail around how we're enabling this, how we're lighting up these devices, how we're managing these devices, and how you can use it across on-premises and in the cloud in a seamless way for things like single sign-on and two-factor authentication, and for resource access. Right? Oops. So I kind of raced through that. Are there any questions? I have just a few more slides as I do my wrap-up. Questions? Keep plugging on, chugging on? OK. So Windows Azure Active Directory. Think of it, as I said, as an extension to your on-premises directory. In the continuum of investments we're going to make, it's really, we're going to try and bridge that gap a lot more. We're going to try and blend these things, these concepts a lot more. This is really your directory. There's an on-premises footprint. There's a cloud footprint. But it's your directory in both ends. Right? It's a platform not just for Microsoft apps, but for your line of business apps, your in-house applications. And it provides you a capability for your cloud applications, the ones you choose to integrate with, to plug into your tenancy and get access to the tenancy. It's been designed to operate at internet scale. The availability guarantees, the performance requirements. And we focus on multi-tenancy. Right? We've taken a great deal of pains to ensure that we respect the boundaries and security and isolation boundaries across tenants. Right? But if that was not convincing enough, just wanted to toss some numbers your way. We already have over 3 million tenants in Windows Azure Active Directory. Right? Because Office has been a big part of this, Office 365. We've only started talking about Windows Azure Active Directory in the past year or so, but it's actually been in existence ever since Office 365 was, sorry. We already handle over 7 billion authentications, and that's just this past week. Just giving you some idea of the scale that Windows Azure Active Directory is already handling. And one of the advantages of taking a bet on a cloud platform service like Azure Active Directory is the fact that the pace of innovation is much higher. Your ability to take advantage of the new things we put out there, the new features we add, the new capabilities that will help you whether you're in an IT role or a developer role, is greatly enhanced because of the pace of our innovation in the space. Over just the 3 months between April and June, actually 2 months between April and June, you've seen us make additional investments in the space in our app space, in our ISV space, in our phone factor, two-factor authentication space, in our device launch space. This is just a period of 2 months, right? And this pace of innovation is something we're committed to and we're kind of going to keep at for the long haul as well. Right? I wanted to toss up some related content. Ed, as I said, Ed Wu, has a session on the Directory Graph API on Friday. Dushyant, who's also sitting up here, has a session on what it means to secure your cloud-based applications with Azure Active Directory. There's another session that I didn't put up here by a fellow named Caleb, who's going to talk about what it means to integrate with Azure Active Directory using rich clients of various stacks. And then Jono has a session that drills down further into things like password sync and dir sync and federation in his talk on Thursday in the afternoon. Right? With that, I'm open to questions, and we're done. So the question, let me know if I got this right. The question was, how does Windows Azure Authentication work with rich clients such as Lync and Outlook?
Yes, the multi-factor authentication.
Multi-factor authentication. Oh, multi-factor authentication, yes. One of the things that I didn't show you, it's a good question. When you enable a particular user for two-factor authentication, that demo, it actually puts a warning, and this is because it's in preview mode right now. It puts up a warning saying, this will not work with your rich client applications. It only works with your browser-based applications. But that's temporary. We are working on a solution for that. And you will see two phases of the solution come into play. One phase of the solution actually tries to abstract this notion using something we call app passwords. And then as these clients get more quote-unquote intelligent and embrace the AAD STS in a richer way, they'll actually have first-class support for two-factor authentication. But that's part of the continuum that we're on. But we think that the first phase of that we'll be able to get to pretty shortly. Any other? Come on, guys. There should be some questions out there. Superheroes, come on, wake up. No? Even that didn't do the trick. Oh, there's a question out there. Multi-forest support. Yes. Jonah will talk about this more in his session. The question was multi-forest support to integrate with Azure Active Directory. We do have a limited preview that's available already, right? Let me step back. The directory synchronization tool that we have is actually built on a product you may be familiar with, an engine, the core engine of a product you may be familiar with called the FIM engine, the FIM product. Dosing sits and just leverages one part of that product, the FIM engine itself. Our solution to multi-forests is kind of twofold. We have a preview, a public preview where this is it's a semi-public preview, is it? We'll go full public beta in July per Jonah, where you can actually get multi-forest support by plugging into the FIM product itself. So FIM as a product today helps you aggregate identities and objects and directories across multi-forest environments. And what we're doing is basically slapping on, in FIM terminology, a connector on that. So you can now take that aggregated set and ship it up over the cloud. That's one flavor of it. There's another flavor that Jonah and team are working on as well, which allows you, using the DirSync appliance itself, the ability to integrate with a simplified version of multi-forest. This is when you have no overlap across forests. It's completely isolated forests, and you want to bring them together and up into the cloud. Right? Jonah will cover some of this in more detail during his session on Thursday. Does that help answer your question? Any other? One more, yeah. So the question was, is Graph API read-only? When can we start writing to Azure AD using the graph? For example, when can we do assignment of licenses? So Graph API is already enabled for writes. Writing licenses specifically using the Graph API is right now in preview mode as we're evaluating how best to structure this through the graph. But you can already take advantage of it. Writes are allowed already. The writing of licenses is in preview. But the rest of it is GA. How can you activate the preview? It's actually, you don't have to do anything specific. Oh, you mean activate the preview for the licensing aspect? I think you get it for free, right?
Different API version.
Oh, you had to specify a different API version. That's right. Ed, if you can meet us offline, we can walk you through the specifics of that. Any other? For the folks in the room who are doing federation today, how many of you are doing federation today? How's your experience been? Excellent. I see thumbs up. That's great. How many of you are going to be evaluating password sync? Excellent. Do you think you'll switch over from federation to password sync? You will? Excellent. That's great. Good. How many of you have built applications or line of business applications using the graph already? A few here already. How many of you the superheroes in the room who were of the developer frame of mind, how many of you think you will actually try and plug and do this? I said 45 minutes. Ed, you think it'll even take that long? No, less than that. How many of you think you'll invest that 45 minutes or less to write a demo app? All right, good. See a few hands up. That's great. How many of you have tried the phone factor preview? Did I ask this already? You have? How many of you think you will leverage the phone factor stuff for management of identities on the cloud? Great. It's good. This is good validation, folks. This keeps us honest. It allows us, it gives us some validation. We're building the right set of functionality. That's good. How many of you are excited by the device store? You may have seen some of this at the keynote as well. How many of you are getting pressurized in your environments to bring in non-Windows devices? So you think you'll take advantage of this capability? Okay, good. For the folks building ISVs, can you put your hands up again? ISV apps. Right. The numbers I tossed at you is a pretty powerful set of customers. I wouldn't say powerful set of customers. It's a pretty large set of customers. How many of you think you'll actually target apps against these customers? Yeah. It's good. Excellent. Any other questions? All right, I'll be here. I'll be at the reception later today and the RC experts tomorrow. But if that's all, then thank you all for attending. Appreciate your attendance. Thank you.